Heyo, welcome everyone to episode 27 of Today in the Scene. I'm Joe with Indie Arcade Wave, and this is my co-host Dylan from Galactic Battleground.
Hey, what's up?
This week we're going to dive into an arcade in New Orleans called Sea Cave. This arcade it's got an awesome story as well as plans for the future. It's like finding lost treasure in New Orleans. I just wanted to welcome the owner here, Judah Lee. How you doing
Hey,
today?
how's it going? Glad to be here.
Good. Yeah, glad you could make it. We've been chatting a little while. Mark introduced us, and I'm glad we were finally able to get on here.
Yeah. Shout outs to Mark. Thanks for that.
Yeah, shout out Wonderville and Death by Audio Arcade there. I just want to jump right into your story. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into the arcade scene.
So my name's Judah, which you just said, I guess. I'm in New Orleans. How did I get into arcades? My earliest arcade game memories are Street Fighter cabinets and corner stores. That's really where I got started. And like there's a lot of personal memories there. I grew up in an all black neighborhood here back in like the 80s. And, being the only white kid in an all black neighborhood can be rough, understandably. One of the first moments I can remember in my early young life where like I was getting the neighborhood kids' respect was I was good at Street Fighter. And you would save up your quarters and you'd go into the corner store and you'd play Street Fighter against the neighborhood kids. And, like if you could win, you were cool, and I was good at it and I would win. So that's really my first arcade experience was actually not in an arcade, but like going to like the bodega and with quarters I had saved up and playing Street Fighter against the kids, and then like going home. And Street Fighter was a good game to start at in arcades because if you got good at it, you could sit on it all day, and just play people. So that's really where I started. It's just playing Street Fighter against the neighborhood kids, you know.
Yeah, right on. For like, what is the arcade scene like in New Orleans in regards to like? I know you had Street Fighter, but like, what is it like? Is there any other ones or just you?
Right now. There's a place called Barcadia. It's more of like a classic arcade. Uh, it's I think something. It's some. I don't know how do I say this nicely. The games aren't in good condition. I think the games are kind of an afterthought in that place. It's more of like just a party spot in the CBD, the Central Business District. We call it the CBD here. A lot of like raver nightclub emphasis over like video games in that place. Back in the day when I was growing up younger, there used to be multiple arcades. There used to be a place called Fun Arcade. There used to be a place right off Canal Street near Bourbon Street in the French Quarter, which is the one I went to all the time. It's called Pennyland. And then sometime like maybe 3 or 4 years after Katrina, they closed, and then there was nothing. And then Barcadia showed up, and then they've pretty much been it till we showed up. So I would say it's been dead for a minute. It's starting to come back. But back in the day, it was definitely, at least during my period there, Pennyland actually is an interesting story. It's one of the oldest arcades in the country. It was one of the first ones, and it was like one of those places where like they would have the like BB gun shooting ranges, and you'd like put the penny in, and you'd get like 10 shots with a BB gun. You'd shoot like little tin ducks and stuff as they like went by, and then would later became like more of an arcade of like what we know arcades to be. By the time I was hanging out there, it was a really shady place. I remember the first thing you would see was that big sign in the door that said like no hats and no white t-shirts, like because of the gang stuff, like
Yeah.
Dress code for an arcade.
yeah, and because you got to understand, like it's right off of Bourbon Street in the French Quarter and Canal, which is just like where all the hustlers were hanging out back then and stuff. But man, it's like where all the good Street Fighter players went. So, I could catch a bus there. And this was around like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike time, like kind of like really like the end golden age of arcade Street Fighter. And yeah, I had a friend who worked at a bar, and this is 17, I'm 17, and I would save up some money and I would catch the bus to Canal Street from my mom's house, and I would go and play like some Street Fighter games, and then I would go to the bar and drink for free at the bar because my friend was bar backing, and then I would go back to the arcade a little more drunk, and play some Street Fighter games, and then catch the bus home. That was like kind of like my routine, end of junior into senior year of high school. And then I went away to Chicago to go to college, and then came back. Katrina happened. Lived in LA for a little while. Came back again, and they were all gone. You know, and it was just everybody was playing Street Fighter and stuff online, and there just wasn't a place to go to anymore. You know, and bothered me for a minute, and then I sort of became a DJ and did the DJ party scene thing, and then I got tired of partying all the time, but wanted to like have a space, a social space that did require you to party so much, that you could go to your friend. I was like, man, well, what was that space back in the day? Like, I knew I had something else, and then I remembered, oh yeah, it's the arcade, and that's really like where I started the arcade. Sort of like trying to be like, yeah, this my hometown needs that space back, because if you've ever been to New Orleans, but like bars don't close here, they stay open all night, 24/7. And you can take liquor and stuff onto the street. Like, it's very much a drinking town. So much of the nightlife is bent towards like that kind of mentality. And like, well, what are we doing tonight? Well, let's go see this band at this bar, or like, let's go to this dive bar, and it's or let's go to this restaurant, and it's pretty much all it was here. And it's just like, no, like, people should be able to say, let's go play some games, or something like that.
Well, and then in come you, and you start to
Yeah.
bring back that arcade scene. So I want to know, how did Sea Cave start? Were you more of like a game collector first, or did the games come after the idea? Or
I'm an artist. I'm not a collector. I mean, I guess I'm a collector in that, like, I collect things to put in the cave, So like if I find something that's like aquatic or fish related on the street, like I grab it up really quick, and it goes into the arcade. It started with me buying an old rundown cabinet that was housing a Shinobi board at the time that hadn't worked for months, that was sitting in the back of this nightclub called Siberia that I had DJ'd out of a lot. And literally Googled cheapest way to build an arcade cabinet, and this was right in the beginning of like the Raspberry Pi thing, and spent the next year figuring out how to dumb down the Raspberry Pi so that they could actually be like an arcade machine, because like one of the things about arcade machines is there's an experience to an arcade machine that like you don't find in like an emulator. Like, yeah, the coin button thing and all that's there, but there's so many things built into emulators and stuff that like aren't arcade there, So like the idea to like record or speed it up or take a screenshot or like, like it was a period of like steadily learning how to remove all of these things and making it a process where people would come in and walk up to the cabinet and like not get stuck in like an option screen, or something. Like they pick their game, play their game, leave the game to play another game, and like that's it, And then so the first one I built was a Neo Geo, basically. I always wanted a Neo Geo. I always wanted to be able to play like Garou and Metal Slug and stuff. And it just, if you're a kid my age when like the Neo Geos came out, I mean, that was like, you had to be a trust fund kid to have one of those things back in like the 90s. They were insanely expensive. I think it was like back when they came out, they were like $1,000, because they run the same exact hardware as the arcade cabinet. So yeah, I never got to play on one except for in the arcade. So that was like the first one I built. And then I found a couple of more cabinets around town, and instead of building like this all-in-one super main machine that just has like this spaceship controller for a control panel with like a million buttons and like a trackball and stuff on it, I started working with the idea of like, okay, well, let's build a cabinet that's single player vertical screen, and then we'll go find another cabinet and we'll make it single player horizontal screen. And then we'll go out and we'll find a 4-player cabinet, and that's the 4-player games, right? And then we'll go out and we'll find a Street Fighter cabinet with like the 2-player 6-button setups, and then that's going to be the fighting game cabinet, and like, so basically taking this thing and like splitting it up into 8 different things, and that's really like how I started with the layout on it. And then it was really just a process of letting people in, and watching what happened, and then making a note and being like, okay, now I need to go and remove that, because that's just unnecessary to the arcade experience and it's getting in the way, and so it was about a year of that. And then and about when I first started, it was called the Video Drone, because I was doing a lot of like VHS based CRT television video art at the time. So I had all these old CRT televisions sitting around, and I was, making TV walls and playing weird VHS on them and stuff. And then was sort of like, okay, that's cool if like you're like an old punk rocker or something, but like it's kind of, it's a Cronenberg film. It's kind of weird referencing point for like an arcade aesthetic. And I came up with the
I think your
idea
mic just
for
cut
calling
out.
it Sea Cave because
Oh
one of my
no,
friends, a guy I
dude.
DJ'd for a long time, this guy Quintron,
He's totally gone.
he has a speakeasy nightclub venue in his basement here that he'll do shows out of every once in a while. And one of the shows is this big Mardi Gras party called the Maritime Ball, and you're supposed to dress up in like an aquatic costume to show up to it. And so I'd been doing that party for about 3-4 years, and I had all these like leftover plastic fish.
What was the name of
And
that party?
the Maritime Ball.
Who ran that?
Quintron?
Quintron. Okay.
Yeah, Quintron and Miss Pussycat. They're musicians from down here on Ghana Records. But I had all these plastic fish, and like a broom handle that had been made to look like a Poseidon trident and stuff like that, right? So I used them all to decorate this art studio that I was building the arcade in, and called it Underwater Arcade one night. And then at some point the term Sea Cave Arcade just like popped into my head, and it kind of became Sea Cave from there. And then from there I realized that like there's aren't really underwater themed arcades ever anywhere
Yeah,
in
I've never heard of
history.
one.
Never heard of one myself either. I like Googled it and couldn't find it. And then like there's a lot of like black light arcade accessories and stuff. Like blacklight fish tanks are a thing. And they all have these plastic plants and all these crazy things you can buy to make. So I was like, well, you can really make like a blacklight arcade that's underwater, and I just kind of started running with that. So it was, buying a lot of fishnet and, buying a lot of plastic aquarium plants. I found a paper mache seahorse on the sidewalk one time, and that was a big score. Uh, I'm down here by the river, so it's easy for me to go down to the riverbank and pick up driftwood and stuff like that. So I started just assembling this space and building these arcade cabinets and in these two art studio spaces before I met my first business partner, and we opened up 5 days a week across the street from this bar down here called Bud Rips. And then we met our third business partner, and now we're moving into a 3,000 square foot space, and we're like building a kitchen and a bar and stuff. And so I feel like I'm really fortunate. Like I know there's a lot of people out there who put like a lot of money into it up front, and it goes nowhere. And in like 3 or 4 years, it's over, and I feel really fortunate because like I'm broke. I've always been broke. I'm not a rich guy. And I've started literally building this space on like $60 junker. Nobody can save this thing arcade cabinets, and have like gotten it up to the point where like we're going to do all right and just living the dream, in a way. So, I don't want to jinx myself. So I feel nervous saying this, but yeah, I feel fortunate, it's hard work.
Yeah, yeah. It always is running an arcade,
Yeah, it's you usually, I find people usually have a really dedicated fan base that will support them to the best of their ability through thick and thin,
Yeah.
But it's if you're in a place where like arcades haven't existed for a minute, like you're basically trying to like reintroduce people to this idea that like a lot of them forgot about. You
Yeah.
know? Like there's so many people I've seen that they're like, oh fuck, like an arcade. We call them draggers. So like we were on a block with with restaurants and like a hipster bar across the street. We had these big plate glass windows. So I can't tell you how many times I would see like groups of people like walk by the plate glass window, and one or two of them would look and be like, "Oh, whoa," and stop, and then like the other ones who weren't interested, like literally dragging them away,
Yeah.
So it's a funny sell in like a lot of ways. It's just a funny business, you
Yeah.
know. But it's full of great people, and I think it's like it's hit this interesting space where like it belongs to the maker community now, almost, you know, in a way, to me, because like the industry that's just has no interest in making new like arcade games, you
Yeah.
know.
In
So it's
regards to like the new scenes, what got you involved with the indie arcades or like indie games in general?
so for me, I think the first, and like this never happened, but like the first game I played on like Steam for a minute, and I was like, man, this would be amazing in an arcade game cabinet, was a game called Crawl, which was out of Australia, made by two guys in Australia, and it's basically one versus all gauntlet, right? Like one person starts off as the human, and then the other three players are ghosts, and they control the traps and the monsters in the room as the human wanders around looking for treasure and keys and stuff like that. And the ghost that gets the killing blow on the human then becomes the human, and it's just this like really great round robin game. And I was playing it, and it's just like two buttons, 8-way joystick, and I was like, man, this is an arcade game. And then I just started like looking. And this is in the first year of the arcade, and then I just started looking for other indie games that I was like, man, this would work in an arcade cabinet. If you did this or this could totally be an arcade game. And then started writing some of these guys. Like I wrote the guys from Crawl, and they got back, and they were like, well, just tell me, what you need from us. And I was like, well, honestly, I don't know yet. Give me some time, And then like a year or so went by, and I kind of realized like what they were going to need from me was some money, and I just didn't have that at the moment. So, I kind of had to step back from some of that stuff. But, from Crawl, it went to like Super Slam Dunk Touchdown, which is, a great mix of a sports game.
Yeah, we talked to Rick
Killer
about that
Queen.
one.
Yeah, yeah. Killer Queen, obviously. Um, what's the one? I think you guys just did an interview with this guy too, where the dog is your co-pilot and you're in the plane, the shooter, the side-scrolling
Oh, you
shooter.
talking about Sky Cursor?
Yeah, yeah, Sky Cursor. I had a friend who'd built an arcade in like part of his music studio space here, and he had Sky Cursor on a Neo Geo, and I had played that, and I was like, oh, that's fucking awesome. Like, that somebody made this pixel art game, that's like an arcade game, like a good arcade game, and that's really kind of like some of my first instances of like, oh, this exists. And then one of my musicians friends told me about DBA Arcade, and I just started following DBA Arcade, and which would become Wonderville. And then I met Mark playing Killer Queen Black during the quarantine. Like, because I knew the guy who ran Wonderville's name was Mark Kleep, and then I'm on Killer Queen Black one night, and I'm playing with this guy who's named Kleep. Yeah. in the game. So I send Wonderville an Instagram message, from like my arcade page being like, hey, I think we're playing Queen together, and like, yeah, and that's how we got started talking. And yeah, and then he, put me in on the Wonderville Discord, and then he brought me into your guys' Discord, and now we've met each other, and he's been really great, I think he's got a soft spot for New Orleans. He's got a lot of friends down here. Like a lot of people who used to like make the pedals and stuff in DBA like came down here after DBA closed down. So there's definitely like a relationship there. But but yeah, yeah. Sorry, I went on a ramble there. My bad.
No, you're good, man.
So along the same lines, with talking to Mark and kind of getting your feet wet, like looking into the indie scene, you mentioned before the interview something about your plans for helping the indie scene in New Orleans
Yeah,
like become a thing.
yeah.
What are your plans there?
Well, I think in any instance wherever you are, the initial plan has to be to like if you build it, they will come. Kind of this Field of Dreams mentality, right? So our first thing is to like provide a space and like take some of our space and start dedicating it to that. You know, and because there's more and more. I mean, I don't know. My experience growing up here, like wanting to make video games, was just something that you didn't do here. Like you had to go somewhere else to do that for a living, or even for school for it. And I think like in a lot of places around the country, like the state government here is trying to court that industry. tax incentives and stuff. So you're starting to see companies like In Exile and stuff like, which I think is like a division of Obsidian or something, move down here. So there's so it's growing, you know. There's and a couple of and I run this weirdo art space indie arcade. So like they come through my door, like Moss to Flame. So I started meeting some of these guys, in particular this one guy named Calder, who's really great. He's been he was one of the first people to discover my arcade, and it's like first rendition, and he's come ever since for a long time now. And I love the guy. Calder, if you ever hear this, love you, buddy. He's the guy who's actually hosting the game jam for us. He's very much more. Well, he is a game designer by trade, and more tapped into that community. And I just think that like he would be more suited to running that and promoting that than I would. I'm kind of the guy who built the arcade. He's a guy who builds the games, So he's hosting that, and we're working with the NOLA indie game dev community, which is like a group of people who I don't know how long they've been around now. I want to say 5 years at least. Who they have a monthly meetup, and they all know each other. And some of these people are people who work for In Exile. Some of these people are just indie developers. And I think really the start is to just like, we bought this cabinet. We're going to host these events, and we just want to like give them the space to like try to make a simple arcade game, and we'll help you test it out, and like the one thing we can get you right now, because we're getting, in our last month of getting the opening hump, so we're kind of strapped for cash. But the one thing we can offer you is like a playtesting space, like you can make this game and we will host it, and people will come through the door and they will play it, and like we can offer you feedback, and like what might make this game work better, or it's glitching out here, or these controls feel awkward because of this, kind of thing. So that's really where we're starting, and as far as I know, like we're not the first people to host a game jam in New Orleans, but like the first people to like kind of start promoting this idea of like, well, have you ever considered making an arcade game? Not just like an indie title for itch.io or Steam or something, but have you thought about making something that goes into a cabinet?
Yeah, I mean, you got to just give them a place to create and show it
Yeah.
off. I mean, as developers ourselves, I mean, we've gotten so much good feedback from people at conventions and whatnot, and
Yeah.
the biggest reason we actually put it in a cabinet was a local arcade said, "Yeah, you could show it off here."
Yeah. And I'll speak to this from like trying and failing to retrofit indie games into an arcade cabinet, is that like, making an arcade cabinet game is sort of like you have to rediscover these really simple things that people have seemingly forgot about, because we're just so used to playing things on consoles now, right? Like,
Yeah, everything's
like
online.
yeah, or just the idea of an option screen, like that doesn't exist in an arcade game. There's no way for the player to go in and adjust the difficulty setting or the volume settings, when they're playing an arcade game. No, you don't do any of that. Like that goes into what's called a service mode screen that's hidden behind a button, behind a lock inside the cabinet, and it's there for the arcade operator to change things, not the players. Like one of the big things about like trying to get these indie games into a cabinet is like having no money and trying to write them and be like, hey, can you get rid of this and this and then reprogram it to this so that I can put it in this? And I have nothing for you right now. Like, I don't want to have that conversation with these guys, like, but like it's when you're talking about building an arcade cabinet game, you have to think about those things. Like you have to think about the walking up, standing experience of the person. Like it's not just a game, it's a piece of furniture in a weird way, like, so you're thinking about all of these actual like real world, real space interactions that like you wouldn't think of if like somebody was just downloading your game and playing it on their computer with their favorite controller, like it. So yeah, there's like one of the favorite stories I think is like listening to the Killer Queen guys talk about how like it didn't occur to them that like the cabinets had to be a certain height, otherwise people who were buying them could not get them inside their establishments. Yeah,
Yeah, we made that mistake with our prototype.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So like nobody's around to tell you that though. Like this used to be like industry know-how. Like like anybody at
Standard
Bally's or
doors.
somebody anybody at Bally's would have been like, oh, it's too tall.
Right.
Like there's nobody nobody around to tell you that anymore.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
you mentioning like the interactions with the cabinet in the game. Like we spent so much time. What do we have now? Like 6 or 7 iterations of our UI screen. Like we
Yeah.
just keep
Yeah,
changing it.
And
yeah,
like luckily, like when I worked at a bar called Can Can Wonderland, and I'd watch it for 2.5 years, watching people be confused on how to start the
yeah,
game, and
yeah.
I had to like figure out what was the best, way to go
See,
about that. You know?
See, for me, like like the couple of indie game guys I've talked to, like they have all these ideas about, oh, the player can adjust this, and I keep trying to tell them, like, dumb it down, like dumb it down. Like the player just wants to be able to walk up and play. They don't want to have to think about all this other shit. Like they want to walk up and be like, oh, well, what's this game about? Hit start and play it. Like that's what the experience is on a cabinet. I mean, if you take out the like insert a quarter part,
Yeah.
and like it's it's almost like writing a good haiku almost, where it's like it's really simple and it follows this really simple format, but
Mhm.
like once you start adding on to the format, it's not that thing, and it's not a haiku anymore, you know right? Like it starts. So yeah, I always preach about how like simplicity, especially when it comes to the UI and stuff, is key. Like if you can't get them playing the game within the first like 30 seconds of them walking up to the cabinet, like every second that ticks by, you risk losing them. You know, especially in like an arcade bar setting, because they can just walk over to the next game.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly. I remember we went to this convention in Las Vegas, and this one dude who was like an operator in California comes up to the game, mashes like 15 buttons, and he's like, "Nope." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Not fast enough," and then left. That's all he
yeah,
said. And I was like,
yeah,
"Holy shit! Like, we need to fix that," you know?
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, he's right. So like to go back to that game Crawl, like like when I was first talking about it, I was like, oh, this thing's good to go. Like it's naive, like it actually could use some adjust. And one of the things in my mind is like an average Crawl game lasts about 30 minutes. That's fucking unheard of in an arcade. Like there's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
arcade
No
game where
way.
you play the game for 30 minutes. I understand that now. So like if I were to talk to them again, I'd be like, well, could you, yeah, which is like way more work than what I was asking of them originally. Is like, well, could you cut this down to 15 minutes, which involves like rebalancing everything in the game. Like how fast you get the experience, like how much life you have, how
I
often,
mean,
like
you could just dumb it down to like 4 rounds instead of, like
you
make it like a best out of 5 or something.
well, so in Crawl, like it doesn't work that way. Like you level up and stuff. So like they would have to speed the leveling up process. And it's just
Yeah.
it's a whole rebalance. And it starts to sink in. Like okay, like I get it now. Like
It'd be a whole new version of the
you
game.
almost have to start. Yeah, exactly. You almost have to start from scratch, thinking this is going to be an arcade game. Instead of like this is going to be an indie game in like an arcade throwback style. Like, no, you have to really go into it thinking like this is going to be in a cabinet, in an establishment. This is what we are developing it for from the start. And like you just have to have that mentality in your mind. And that's why with this game jam, like the only rule we have on it is like you are building a game for an arcade cabinet. This is to be an arcade game. So approach it like that. Like don't retrofit some other indie game you got, or something into it. Like think about a fresh arcade game from the start. And that means thinking about, you said, about like too slow, or like takes me too long to get jumped in, like what do the controls look like, and that's and like to me that's one of the other things about making arcade cabinets is like, man, you just like you have so much more freedom in your game design if like you're designing for an arcade cabinet than say a console. Like if you're making a game for Xbox, then like you're expecting everybody to play it on the same controller almost. If like you look at a game like what's the Paperboy, with the bike handle with the button on it,
Yep.
like you have so much more interesting avenues to go down with Tubin is a great example. Each player gets 5 buttons on Tubin for
Yeah.
like directions. Like you could just play with controls so much, in an arcade game. And like it's trying to emphasize to them, like think about that. Like think about the control panel. What'll it be? Like and try to like get cool with it because like you can actually do more of the control panel on an arcade cabinet. Because like the way you control your character in the game is just so much of the game, And I think like a lot of games suffer from homogenization because we're all using the same controllers,
Hmm.
And
Like
so like
joystick, 2 buttons. Yep.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's totally
exactly.
fair.
And like and if you're playing an arcade game, like you can put a steering wheel on it. You can have buttons with a trackball. You can just have all buttons. You can have I know twin stick games exist, but has somebody made a tri stick game? You know, like
Yeah.
what would that look like?
That'd be insane.
Like, you
Well, yeah, I
know,
mean, even I just spoke with Amanda, and she made Sententable, and that's a fighting game that has 100 buttons.
Jesus Christ,
Yeah,
really?
Wonderville built her a cabinet for it,
Wow. Okay.
so you should look into that one
Yeah,
definitely.
I will look into that one. That one sounds great. 100
Yeah.
buttons. So you have a 1 through 100 range from like short to fierce. Basically, is that the idea?
Basically, the way it works is like there's 50 buttons for each player. You're face to face, and every single game, all the buttons reset, so there's no way to know exactly which
Oh
button
my
you're
god!
hitting
So
and
it's
what
just a
ability it is.
massive button mash.
Yep, her goal was to make you feel
Amazing.
like you're a 6-year-old playing a fighting game for the first time and you have no
That's
idea what to do.
amazing. That's great. That's so counterintuitive. So, like, for example, we're talking about that's so counterintuitive to what Street Fighter is and how Street Fighter plays. Like, Street Fighter has gotten to the point where it's like it's about precision. You know, it's about exact inputs. Like like I almost feel like serious Street Fighter players who practice their combos and stuff are like the same kind of people that you see practicing their guitar riffs over and over again. You
Hmm.
know, where it's like it's this series of inputs done really quickly over and over again so that the muscle memory is there so that you get exact results every time, right?
Yeah.
And that what you just described to me is great because it's just completely like you have no idea what you're about to play. So that's genius. Like, but I love stuff like that. So and like I don't you couldn't make that game for PlayStation, you know.
No, you
You
can't.
couldn't make that. Yeah, I don't think I have 100 buttons on my keyboard here at my computer. I don't even know if I could play that on my computer.
You can play it on your computer. You just need 4 USB keyboards. It's
Okay.
available.
All right. All right. Well, I got two.
4. You need 4.
But yeah, and then like so but then like even beyond that, like if you look at Killer Queen, that's it's a joystick and buttons. Like that's a pretty simple setup. But like the interesting thing is like, wow, it's 5 versus 5. You know,
Yeah.
and it's this weird mix of like old school arcade Mario Brothers meets Joust meets like an esport almost.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just like where do you see that at, you know and then you have like games like Sky Cursor, which are just like direct throwbacks to something that like a person loved,
Yeah. Hmm.
back in the day.
Like
And then you
Raiden.
see,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then you see like Black Emperor, which is like a really simple one-player game with like an interesting control scheme to it. And then more importantly, like just like interesting stage level in that game, design in that game. Like so I don't know. Like I think like you saw vinyl resurgence in movies, and like recorded media and stuff like that. Like I think there's like definitely like this generational appreciation for things older, but at the same time, like how can we mess with this and make it new again? And I think you're starting to see that come around with like arcades, you know. And I mean, I was saying this before the interview, like I think it's important because like I think the arcade is a space that like is especially after COVID-19 and everybody being in quarantine, like and playing video games by themselves at home for so long. It's just such a refreshing type of space if you're into games. It's yeah, I would brag about this a lot where like because like in the fighting game community or the FGC for short, like there's a lot of toxic stuff that goes on. Like, like people losing matches online and just saying terrible things to each other, you know? And I never had to deal with that in my space in like the 6 years I've done it. I've maybe had to kick one person out for that kind of behavior, and it's because they were saying that kind of stuff online on my page, but they weren't doing it in space. And I just, I think like many other things in the world today, like playing games. If you're into games and video games and like get out of the house and like there should be a space in your town where like you can go and play these games with people in real life, preferably over just online.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's coming back. I think people are starting to realize that. You know, so
Yeah, I mean, people want to be able to uh, be there and actually talk to their opponent and their competitor and
mhm.
get everything going. And along those lines, you said you're upgrading your space. You're going
Yeah,
from a small space to a large space.
yeah.
I want to know what your plans look like for that new space and how they differ from the previous Sea Cave.
Okay, so the first. I mean, I was talking about this before the interview, so I guess I'll start from the beginning. The first CK was literally a art studio space that I rented out with two friends. One of them recorded his first record in there. His name's Benny, Benni. He does synth music. I highly suggest checking him out. If you're looking for somebody to do a soundtrack for your game, he's also a great option.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, and he was recording his album, and I was building my first arcade cabinets in that first space, and it was just literally once or twice a month Facebook event, knock on the door, I'll walk you down the hallway, let you in, game night, right? Then that building got bought out by a guy who was going to open a brew pub or something, and he evicted all the artists. And I had to find a new place, and I found a place that had a door on the street, and it was a smaller space, but it had a door on the street. But I was saying earlier, the door was 4 feet off the ground and didn't have stairs. So you had to like walk in. You had to go up a step ladder to get into the place. And I was in there for about a year. And then it just, my roommates moved out because they couldn't afford it anymore. And I rented out my cabinets to Matt, who was my first business partner. And this is how I met him, trying to make some money to pay for the space. And that didn't work out. And then, I had explained the idea for the place as a business to him, and he really liked it. And then one day doing construction work, I walked by this space and told Matt, it's just a perfect spot. It was a commercial space with like a door on the street that you didn't have to go through a step ladder on. And it was across the street from this popular bar. And kind of called up Matt, and I was like, hey, this is the spot. Like, we need to call this number and see if we can get this space. And Matt wrote up a business plan, and we went to the landlord's meeting with this business plan. And this guy, super rich, like owns a real estate company or an insurance company, and like I walk into this guy's building, I'm just like, oh, we're screwed, And we laid a plan down, and it's just like it was like a scene on a Shark Tank or something. Like he's just like, I got these guys, they want to drop in $200,000 on this thing, but I like your idea, I'm gonna go with you. And like, and we were just both sort of like, okay, what did that just fucking happen? And like we did it for a year, and then that space, and then we get the word from our landlord that this guy Billy, who owns Sparcadia, the other arcade bar in town, is telling you about, is basically like they took our lease. And
wow.
Yeah, and they're putting a sushi restaurant in there or something, So suddenly, like we're out on the street and we don't know what to fucking do, and we're frantically trying to find another spot to keep it going. And then, so I found this building that I'd been like eyeing out for a second, and this couple from up north had bought it and a bunch of other properties next to it with this idea of putting a hotel complex in there. And the city council shot the idea of the hotel down, and basically, like in return, they basically started asking the neighborhood what they'd like to see in the space instead, and somebody told them about us.
Yeah.
And so we went and saw the space and really hit it off with the landlords, and they decided to give the space to us. And so we've been in that space now for a year, building it out and doing sort of like kind of our speakeasy soft opening things, come around the gate in the back, paper's still in the windows, but you can come in here and hang out and play games kind of thing. And like and then we're doing all right, and then COVID happened.
Oof.
And then we got hit with a hurricane here this summer too. And it's just been kind of hectic, but like somehow, amazingly enough, like we're like 1 month away from like being done, and I couldn't tell you how I got here honestly, at this point, it's just like I'll write a book about it in like 4 months after being open or something when I got the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, my life turned into the movie Dodgeball for like a good second there.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Globo Arcade, like
Yeah.
but yeah. So
Well,
it's a strange trip.
yeah, I'm sure. I mean, just from the stories you've told us, it definitely sounds like quite a bit happened. So, we really appreciate you coming on here. Before we
Yeah.
wrap everything up, Judah, I want you to shout out your guys' social media so people can find you.
Yeah, so our best place would be on Instagram, and it's c.cave. Also ccavearcade.com, www. And I mean, it's going to be mostly local people as of right now, but if anybody's out there and wants to give us a hand on this game jam, I can send you guys a picture of the flyer here on Discord after we're done with this. But it's ccabgamejam.com, www.seacabgamejam.com is where like all the info and the signups and stuff are be for that. So, and the guy running is a guy named Calder. He's a great guy. And yeah,
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Judah. We really appreciate it.
yeah.
To anybody that's listening to the show, if you enjoy what we're doing here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and follow us for the next episode. We release episodes every single Friday, and you can definitely check the episodes that we've done before. But until next Friday, peace.